this is Dr. S.J. Kala, an Associate Professor of English at Fatima College, Madurai. In this video, I'm going to deal with the fourth section of Terry Eagleton's Capitalism, Modernism and Postmodernism. So here we go. It deals with the political and ideological implications. So the political and ideological implications on modernism, postmodernism, and how it led on to political fragmentation and impotence will be studied here. So this is the third part of my video. In Capitalism, Modernism and Postmodernism, Terry Eagleton contrasts the political potential in modernism with the political impotence of postmodernism. So you please pay attention. In modernism there is political potential, but in postmodernism there is political impotence, and he frames these movements within the broader context of capitalist development. So modernism, despite its formal detachment from mass culture, as we have seen in the previous videos, and its elitist tendencies, it still retained a degree of utopian energy, a driving force that aimed at transcending the alienating conditions produced by capitalist society. So the political and ideological implications, you find it to be manifested in postmodernism with its focus on pluralism, difference, and the decentering of the subject. Ultimately, it diffuses political energy and it goes further to undermine the possibility of collective revolutionary change. So now let's look at the utopian energy and political potential. Eagleton views modernism as deeply embedded in the social contradictions of early capitalism, particularly its effects of alienation and reification, the concepts that were central to Karl Marx's critique of capitalist society. So alienation in Marxist terms refers to the estrangement of individuals from what the products of their labor, their own creativity, and their social relationships within capitalist productions. So estrangement of individuals from the products of their labor, their own creativity, and their social relationships within capitalist productions. So you find that Eagleton makes use of this or refers to the term reification, which he describes as how human relationships, values, and social processes are objectified, and thus they become commodities that are stripped of their social as well as their moral meaning. So modernist works reflected a profound critique of these conditions by rejecting traditional realist forms and by engaging in formal innovation, fragmentation, and self-reflexivity. All these we just covered in the previous video. So stylistic choices that mirror the fragmented and the alienated experiences of individuals in capitalist society also were reflected in the modernist works. So we come on to deal with Bertolt Brecht, a key figure in modernist aesthetics, whose work sought to engage audiences in critical reflection on social realities. So when we focus on Brechtian theatre, particularly, you find that it uses alienation effects and it aimed to prevent audience identification with the characters, which we normally tend to do. Okay, so it just prevented audience from identifying themselves with the characters on the stage. Instead, it started encouraging a detached, a critical attitude towards the societal conditions depicted on stage. So Brecht's work exemplifies the utopian energy of modernism in its commitment to make audiences aware of the structural inequalities and contradictions that you really find in the capitalist society, and thus it started promoting political consciousness that can inspire revolutionary action. So Eagleton, in line with this utopian energy and in line with and aligned with the thought of Frankfurt School, particularly theorists like Theodor Adorno and Walter Benjamin, he viewed modernist art as a potential site of political critique. We know that in the previous video we saw that postmodernism was devoid of all of these things. There was no space for political or ethical discourses in postmodernist art. Unlike modernist art, that was a potential site of political critique. So Adorno argued that the autonomy of art is its capacity to resist commodification and mass production that you see in the modernist art. And when you do that, you can really offer space for critical reflection, especially on the capitalists' alienation. So even if modernist art was often removed from popular culture, its focus on the inner workings of the mind, its fragmented narratives, and its critique of reification, all of these things helped in political discourses or helped in political engagement, particularly with the alienated conditions of the capitalist society. So in this way, modernists tried to retain their political potentials. How? By resisting commodification, which was a characteristic feature of the mass-produced culture, and thus they started foregrounding the alienating effects of capitalism. So now that we have looked at the political and ideological implications on modernism, let's move on to postmodernism, the pluralism, difference, and political impotence. So in contrast, Eagleton argues that postmodernism emerged alongside the development of late capitalism, and it started reflecting a more politically conservative tendency, where modernism sought to transcend alienation and it started critiquing capitalist society. So it started transcending alienation. So postmodernism, as we have been repeatedly looking at in the previous videos also, postmodernism started embracing fragmentation, pluralism and difference, and by doing that they started diluting the potential for collective political action. So you cannot think of a collective political action. So it started diluting all of that. And Eagleton critiques the de-differentiation of high and low culture in postmodernism, and he started noting on how postmodern works blurred or eroded the boundaries between elite art and popular culture, but without the critical edge. As I told you previously also in my previous video too, postmodernism lacked the critical edge, and but you find modernists always were for the critical edge, and so modernist formal innovations were characterized by the critical edge, and postmodernism's emphasized on pluralism and difference. These concepts are central to the work of great thinkers like Deleuze and Derrida, and Eagleton also started thinking of a political fragmentation based on these thinkers. And you find that Deleuze's concept of rhizome is a model for thinking about non-hierarchical networks of thought and action, where meaning and identity are constantly shifting. So similarly, Derrida's deconstruction also focuses on destabilizing fixed meanings, and it started questioning binary oppositions, particularly that of truth and falsehood, presence and absence, dark and light, and both thinkers and critique the idea of a unified subject, and they emphasize on the decentering of the subject, that is to say the idea where the identities are not fixed but are fluid and multiple. So while these intellectual trends started offering important critiques of essentialist and authoritarian modes of thought, Eagleton argues that they also started undermining the possibility of revolutionary change. So as I told you earlier, postmodernism lacked its critical edge, and because of that you cannot dream of some revolutionary change. And they also rejected the idea of a unified political subject or ideology, and therefore postmodernism started abandoning the notion of a collective political project. So if at all there were some projects, political projects, they were individualistic projects and they were not collective projects together as a group. So Eagleton suggests that postmodernism started celebrating difference and individual identity rather than the collective identity. It started fragmenting political resistance, and thus it was difficult to mobilize a collective movement. Only when you come together as a group can you challenge somebody. But you cannot dream of that at all in postmodernist scenario. So it was difficult to mobilize a collective movement that was capable of challenging the exploitative structures of capitalism. So postmodernism's relativism, particularly its rejection of grand narratives, was a term coined by Jean-Francois Lyotard in his postmodern conditions. So for Lyotard, postmodernism is characterized by skepticism towards meta-narratives. They started disbelieving the meta-narratives or overarching, universalizing stories that started claiming to explain the world. What sort of the world, such as using the theories like Marxist theory of class struggle or the Enlightenment's belief in progress. So all that they started disregarding, and so Lyotard also started rejecting totalizing ideologies, and he said that such totalizing ideologies can be seen as a response to the failures of previous grand narratives. So Eagleton argues that this relativism is ultimately what led to political conservatism. So by rejecting any unified framework for understanding and critiquing capitalism, postmodernism avoids taking a firm political stance. So it leaves behind the structures of capitalist exploitation. It's not bothered about it at all. You exploit any number of people in any possible ways, and it's not bothered about it at all. So it leaves all of them unchallenged. So Eagleton's critique extends to their celebration of postmodernist celebration of surfaces in postmodern culture, where cultural products are consumed as spectacle rather than as vehicles of meaning or political critics. So postmodernism's focus is always on pastiche, irony and simulacra as theorized by Jean Baudrillard, and they reflect the commodified, spectacle-driven nature of late capitalism, where there's no truth. So reality is replaced by endless representations of simulations. So in such a context, cultural products are no longer served to challenge or critique capitalist society, but they are commodified and they are consumed as part of the capitalist spectacle. So let's look now at the political fragmentation and impotence. Eagleton sees postmodernism's focus on pluralism and difference as politically disabling, while modernism's fragmentation was often a critique of. So whenever modernists dealt with fragmentation, they always tried to critique capitalist alienation. So postmodernism fragmentation resulted in disconnection from collective political action. As I told you, you could not come into a collective political action, and therefore they started rejecting the grand narrative, and the decentering of the subject made it difficult to imagine a unified political struggle against capitalism. So, by rejecting any fixed political ideology, postmodernism leaves itself unable to challenge what the exploitative structures of capitalism. So, for Eagleton, postmodernism's celebration of difference and pluralism was kind of appeared to be liberating, though it tried to reinforce the status quo by preventing the formation of a coherent political movement. So, having dealt with this part, let me sum it up for you. So, modernism's utopian energy sought to transcend capitalist alienation. How? Through formal innovation of genres and political critique. With postmodernism's political impotence, which embraced fragmentation and relativism at the expense of collective political action. So, modernism, despite its detachment from mass culture, retained the potential to critique and resist the alienating conditions of capitalism. While postmodernism's focus on pluralism, difference, and the decentering of the subject fragments political resistance, leaving it unable to challenge the exploitative structures of late capitalism. So, thank you so much for your patient watching. Hope this video was useful to you.